We are now started. We are now
Okay,
recording.
great. I am so excited to be here, and I'm going to be giving you a little different perspective than we heard this morning. What a great talk and what a great lead in. But I'm going to be looking at the practitioner's perspective. So how do you connect the MBTI or whatever tool you use to Jungian theory? It seems to be so complex, and that's really what I'm talking about today. So here's my background, and just so you know, I don't want to spend a lot of time with on me, but I've been around the block in this yellow convertible. And Dean is my business partner. Dean, wave to everybody. She's going to be helping us out with the chat. So if you have any questions, please type them in the chat. I think I have a lot of material to go over, and I am going to stay till 11 o'clock for people that have questions or want to have a discussion. And hopefully I'll have a little bit of time left for Q&A at the end. So that's how we're going to be doing it. So this is a picture of my tap teacher, my Zoom tap teacher. I'm now taking tap dancing lessons to help my brain in COVID, right? And you might be thinking, what the heck does tap dancing have to do with type? Well, I learned something from Terrence Taps this year, and that was that when you tap dance, if you change your steps just a little bit, you can alter the choreography immensely. If you take what you know and what you've already learned and then tweak it, you get to the heart of tap dancing. It isn't about all new shiny combinations. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today with regard to type. If you take what you know as a practitioner and really start to call it out and really bring it to people's attention, then we get to the heart of facilitating type. And Terrence is a lot of fun. You can see that, right? He's a lot of fun. So this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be talking about the background and context for my presentation, some practitioner dilemmas. You've heard many this morning. And I'm going to talk about 4 principles of facilitating psychological type that are really relevant regardless of the tool that you use. I'm going to show you how to frame these principles, how to use images to bring them forward. I'm going to give you some exercises and techniques, and hopefully we'll be able to have a Q&A session. If I don't get through everything, I've given you a comprehensive handout. Susan has extra copies. She can put them in the chat if you don't have them, but they're attached to the link. I've written an article about this, and that's also attached to the link and on my website. So let's get started. We're going to take a poll. I just want to say really quickly that I've delivered type probably just about every way there is to deliver type over the 20 years of my practice. And I have found that these principles work with every way that I deliver type. But I want to get an idea of what you guys do. So Susan, can you launch the poll? So what is your favorite type tool? How do you deliver type? That was so interesting. It's probably interesting for everybody else to see too, right? Yeah.
So the group can't see it yet. We're at 29 of 32, so we can end polling and I'll share results.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, great. So it's really interesting to see how people deliver type. We use the 8 functions, card sorts, other different ways of doing it. MBTI and Type Coach are right up there. Right now in my practice, I've done, thank you. Should I just stop it, Susan, or can I just close it? Does that work? Okay. So these principles really can be inserted into any way that you give type. And regardless of the tool that you use, I'm hoping that today I can help enrich, deepen, and nourish your type program so you have participants, so you give your participants an experience that connects them in a more holistic way to who they are. So every time I have a type program, I do an inventory and I ask people if they've taken the MBTI before and if they remember their type. And invariably, there's only 1 or 2 people left when all the hands are down. And people only remember 1 or 2 letters. So they're remembering their type in parts. What I hope to do today is give you some tips on how to help people walk away with a holistic understanding of type as the cognitive system of energy that it really is. And how are we going to do that as practitioners? It's a really tall order. It's going back to Jung. So here's a really poignant quote that I like to look at. When cut flowers are in a vase, they die. So if we don't connect type to its roots, we're in trouble. And type, as it was originally created by Jung, is in danger of dying, right? So we saw that today in Richard's presentation. We need to keep type tied to its Jungian roots. And in the article that I wrote, there's a large history of this. It originally came from Angelo Spoto, and Catherine Myers and Angelo really worked to help practitioners understand the roots of typology so that they could deliver it more effectively and in a more holistic way. And by the way, this is a great, navigating the seasons of later life is a really great primer for understanding typology. So this is the result of type not being connected to its Jungian roots. In 2005, we saw the cult of personality testing. And then we saw Adam Grant go on what I call a Grant rant. Has anybody been, and most people are familiar with Adam Grant and what he's really done to the reputation of the Myers-Briggs. And I think that's because he favors the Big 5 personality trait instrument. And then we had Merv Emery, who appeared on many podcasts and radio shows. And then out of that came the HBO persona video that people have been talking so much about, right? So all of this is really depressing. And then, you know, if I do a search on the internet for free MBTI tests, look what I get. And we all know this. This is what Richard was talking about earlier. What really struck me was his ISTJ is like celery, right? It's tough and rigid and unbendable. Talk about stereotypes, but, you know, Dilbert got into the mix. And then, you know, however, I have to say I was really heartened when I saw this one, right? Susan Nash, ENFJ, and Markey. Isn't that great? ENFJ is the strongest of the types, the protagonist, lovely, strong personality type that lives up to its name, right? Isn't that wonderful? Not really so much, right? It is so frustrating. No matter who you are, to keep hearing this stuff is so frustrating. So what I want to do is just give you some time to reflect. Like, we can think about type in an academic sense, but as practitioners, how is this affecting us, right? What is it doing to us, and what is it doing to our ability to give really good feedback? So here's 2 questions that I've posed, and I'd like you to react to the one that speaks to you. How has the MBTI as portrayed in the popular press affected you personally as a type practitioner? And how have you had to adjust and react? I heard a story from Susan this morning, right, on how you've had to adjust and react to your granddaughter. So go ahead and type into chat some comments. Dean, do you see any comments coming in?
Not at the moment.
Oh, okay.
I'm horrified, Carol.
You're horrified when you hear this. Yeah.
Yeah, from Carol.
Yeah. So how does it affect you as a practitioner? Anybody?
I'm put on the defensive. Cash said it's made me angry. No effect as yet.
Yes.
Getting angry and going into discussions on LinkedIn.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Getting angry, going into discussions on LinkedIn.
Very hard to get people to want to use it. it has
Yes.
encouraged me to focus on Jungian content instead of calling it out by MBTI. And
Yeah.
I had a public showdown with a trade program led to justify my use of type. And then
Wow.
some support for Rogers. Yeah,
Yeah.
more stuff coming in.
More stuff.
Staying
coming.
away
Yeah.
from the title of MBTI.
Stay away from the title of MBTI. I can so relate to that. Sometimes I'm really taken aback when I say I'm an MBTI practitioner. Somebody actually said to me the other day, "Oh my gosh, you still use that old thing?" You know, it causes us to bang our head against a brick wall because we know better, right? We know better. So the struggle is real, right? It's a struggle. So what I'd like to know is what you hear in your workshops that you have to really fight against. What do you hear in your workshops?
So the messages are pouring in right at about 20. And there's a lot on self-reflection, questioning, presenting where it sounds like woo, going back to Jungian roots.
Right.
There's a lot of good things that I'm sure everyone's reading in here.
Awesome.
The helplessness, stepping back from that, things like that. Great.
And while you're facilitating, what happens? While you're facilitating, what do you hear? Anything?
There's a lot in here and
Okay, awesome. So this is what I hear when I facilitate, and I didn't make these up for the presentation, right? The one I really loved, I actually put this in a thought, but this was the hardest one. I had a group of physicians, you know, very, very intellectual people, women leaders, and somebody came in the middle of the it was actually at the very beginning of the presentation. And this actually, after doing this for over 20 years, really threw me off my game. And she said, "This is based on Jung science," right? So I had to stop and regroup. And again, I was put in that defensive position where I had to say, "Oh, look, we have a technical manual. If you'd like to talk to me afterwards, you know, I have a lot of research studies." So it's really a struggle, right? You know, I'm an ambivert. I do both.
Yes.
There's tons of articles about ambiversion, right? A totally fundamental misunderstanding of Jungian conceptual theory.
And Susan,
so
you said BBC just had an article about ambiverts, so it's everywhere.
There you go, right? And I wrote an article about that. I did put it in pre-reading. So here's the problem, and I read this. It's more poignant than it seems. I read this from Gordon Lawrence, who published all these books, and in a Journal of Psychological Type article. I highly recommend you going to read the article. Our clients can't latch on to the main idea of type until they broaden their mental picture of personality makeup. The influence of the popular press is too strong. The influence of trade instruments and the history of trade instruments in the history of our psychology and our culture, as you know, as Richard put it, as a tape measure. You know, we're used to thinking of things in terms of strength and measurement and bad or good, high or low. And even though we say we have our spiel and we say things over and over and over again, our clients can't latch on to the main idea of type until they broaden their mental picture of personality makeup, until they understand what a type instrument really is. So we have to make sure that as practitioners, we're grounded in Jungian theory. We understand what Richard is talking about today, what, you know, the base, where did type come from, right? So when we give people the Myers-Briggs or type coach or any other instrument, we're looking at giving them a 4-letter type code. And that's the psychology of consciousness. That's just what's conscious. Type lies in the center. I mean, I'm giving you the most basic, simplest, stupid overview of Jungian psychology that you'll ever get, right? I don't have time for anything else, but Type lies between in our total psyche, our ego and ourself. And it's about understanding who we are, both consciously and unconsciously, so that we can expand that archetypal self. It becomes stronger. And the more we get in touch with our unconscious world, expand ourselves, the more we have ego strength. And I'm not talking about our ego gets bigger. I'm talking about our ego strength to maintain and hold those contents which are unconscious and uncomfortable for us gets bigger. So really, our job as practitioners is to help people expand consciousness. This is so much different than behavioral, what I do. We're not really teaching people about what I do and how to do something differently. We're helping them understand who they are at a deeper level. And we all know this as practitioners, but we don't call it out. So our clients are coming in with notions that are they're unconsciously embedded in their brain. And even though we think we're changing their minds, we're not many times. So changing mindsets is a very tall order. Jungian concepts are really complex. So how are we going to do that? We're going to take, I say, this is feedback according to Cindy and years of experience. I see that it really, really helps. It doesn't move everybody off the mark totally, but it helps to call out principles of psychological type. Psychological type is cognitive. We all know that. Psychological type is holistic. It's a system. It's a system of energy, of exchange of unconscious and conscious energy, and it's developmental. People go in thinking that they're getting a diagnostic, right? What are you going to tell me about myself? When really it's all about self-discovery, even if you use an instrument. And how do we do it? We do it through tiny tweaks, just like Terrence Tapp said. We change the choreography of our type programs just a little bit. Many of you are probably familiar with Susan David. She wrote Emotional Agility. She's really hot on the emotional intelligence scene. And she's awesome, by the way. And she said, any sea captain will tell you that if you steer a ship just a few degrees this way or that, you completely alter its trajectory. We can give people more than we are. We can call out the fact that psychological type is cognitive. It's of the mind. It's how we see things. It's how we take in information and make decisions, and the energy that we have to do that. And we all know this, right? But I'm suggesting that in your programs, or in our programs in general, that we use illustrations, images, quotes to call this out more proactively. Like, I love to use this image because it's a head, it's a big head. And we have all of the Jungian colors. We have green, red, yellow, blue. So in the beginning of a program, I call it out. Psychological type is cognitive. You know, I know that we all say, these are mental functions. These are cognitive processes. These are functions in their attitude. These are mental functions. And when we say that, we think, okay, you know, our people got it. They got it, but they don't. They get lost in the parts. They don't really understand what we're saying when we say they're mental functions. They don't really get that until they see type in a different light. So to prime the pump at the very beginning of a type session, this is what I do. I ask people to, and now in the world of Zoom, I put people into breakout groups and I ask them to discuss this quote that comes directly from psychological types. We naturally tend to understand everything in terms of our own type, right? What are the implications, I ask, of that for yourself, your teams, your leaders, your peers, and when you interact with your family? And I get people come back and they start to see what I'm talking about, that it's perspective. So if you could just chat and pretend that you're a participant in a class, which you actually are, so you really have to pretend. What are the implications of this quote for you? You can put that in the chat box. What do you see, Dean? Oh, you're muted.
Okay, rare when I'm muted. Confirmation bias, it's a lifelong challenge to overcome my own biases. Linda's saying I start with whole pattern using essential motivators or interaction, then go to dynamics. Standpoint theory, it's colors, everything I see and do. It reminds me that I approach life with a bias and might be projecting onto other people. Yeah, that's me. We tend to see what we already believe to be true. I have an autofocus lens. I can only see things differently when I choose to turn it off. Nice image. I talk about type as a filter of our own perceptions. We can't get beyond ourselves.
Yeah,
Freedom to understand.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Freedom, I want to hear that one, Dean. Freedom to.
Let's see, freedom to understand that others don't think the way I do. And then from Molly, it verifies family. Oh, it keeps popping.
Oh, okay.
I think it's family debates and discussions.
Right. So listen to these answers. When I prime the pump for the whole workshop with this particular quote, people start to change their mindset about what type is about. Don't get me wrong, in the middle of a workshop, even after I prime the pump, I'm still going to hear those things that I struggle against, but I can bring them back to something that I've already given them. And it works, even if they don't know what I mean by type yet, because they take type as me. I naturally tend to see everything the way I see it, right? So it's a great quote to use. I'm a big fan of quotes and images. As you will see, I use an image like this to talk about the fact that type is perspective. It's how we see the world. It's our vantage point. So this is a great, I pull images from Adobe stock photo. I think it's worth it to pay for it. So I use this image. And then we can make up stories and talk about the fact that what Jung said was, when we are awake, our minds alternate between taking in information, perceiving, making decisions in the inner and outer worlds. And we can make up stories about this. We can talk about, or we can ask our participants to talk about, give me an example of when you've taken information and then made a decision. So quite simply, I use the example of I get up in the morning and I look outside, I perceive what the weather is, and I decide what to wear. And we move back and forth all day long, hopefully in a balanced way between taking in information, making decisions in the introverted and our inner and outer worlds. Then I have a little trick, and I'm sure I heard some of you say you already do this. I use these colored transparencies. They're really cool. So what I do is I ask my participants to hold them up in front of their face. It's kind of like a looking glass, right? I've seen it where people use rose-colored glasses or different colored glasses, but it's a really good trick because they start, and then I ask them to switch. Because you're looking through blue, and we all know that's thinking. And then you're looking through red. We all know that represents feeling in the Jungian palette. So you can keep doing that. And then I do this trick where I put all of these things together and I say, if we're really not listening to everybody individually, it becomes sort of a muddled mess, right? So that's another tip to use. This is probably the hardest thing to get through to people. And that is that our preferences are different than our behavior, right? So a lot of people, when they go into class, think that when we talk about extroversion, introversion, sensing, intuition, etc., we're talking about traits, right? The preferences are the traits that we're talking about, and that's really incorrect. Preferences are multifaceted categories. And our habits of mind, which come from our preferences, are expressed through our behaviors, right? And then we can see those behaviors, and those behaviors point to the mental processes. They're patterns that we can see that help us to understand one another. And it's a little confusing when we deliver definitions. A lot of us don't take the time to really separate out the structural features or essence of the preference category itself with the behaviors that indicate a preference. And, you know, people get confused too, because on the indicator itself, Myers used behavioral traits or things that we do to indicate preferences, right? So they've just taken an indicator and they're asking, they're selecting between behaviors that they prefer, and they get stuck in those parts. But Myers used the analogy, we all learned this in our certification courses, of straws blowing in the wind. The more we select a behavior in one direction, the more likely it is that we prefer that preference category. Straws blowing in the wind. So we can define then, when we give our programs, we can be really, really clear on what the preferences are, right? Extroversion is, introversion is, and we can separate that out from behaviors. And my friend Linda Behrens always says, and I agree with her, use ing, right? Use action words, use adjectives. When I am extroverting, I am expressing myself openly. That's a behavior that people can see that indicates that extroversion or extroversion might be in consciousness, right? Again, we move back and forth between our conscious and our unconscious. So when we see these behaviors, we can start to get clues about where people are coming from in the moment. So we can call them preference categories, right? So preference category is so much different than a preference. When we say category, that kind of in and of itself negates trait, right? We're taking it away from trait, a singular, to category. So let's pause here a minute, and I wonder if anybody has any comments, questions, thoughts. What questions do you have?
Cindy, it's Carol. Would you say more about that categories and taking it away from trait?
Sure. If I say something's a category, what that implies that it is that it's multifaceted. A trait is a singular characteristic of behavior that leads to other behaviors. It's the source of behavior, right? But it's a singular characteristic that is measured on a scale of high to low. So when the Big Five looks at extroversion as a trait, it's saying that I'm high on extroversion, but low on introversion. If I'm looking at it as a category, I can see that there are multiple different behaviors that I'm expressing with regard to that preference. Does that help, Carol? Does that help, Carol?
I'm going to jump in for a second.
She
Sorry,
says yes.
I nodded, Cindy. I'm sorry. I forgot you couldn't see me.
Yeah.
Kevin's curious, do people still ask about what's good or bad when you use category language?
People ask about what's good or bad when I use trait language. What's good about extroversion? What's good about, they use it all the time with everything. You know, I especially, Kevin, when people find their whole type, they get really excited about it. So they start to think this is the right way. It's, you know, it's great to be extroverted, not good to be introverted. So of course, in my programs, what I'll do is make sure that I'm presenting these categories as neutral, right? And all the behaviors as neutral. And that's the beauty of type 2. You can talk about it in neutral language. There's nothing bad or good about extroversion or introversion. Whereas, yeah. Go ahead.
David has a nice summarizing thought here. We need
Oh,
to earn
all
the
right.
right to talk about type by focusing on the issue people want to address first, and then moving towards type as a system that offers unique insight.
Awful. That's just beautiful. Awesome. Thank you, David.
Got a couple more. Do you want to hear them?
Sure.
One
sure.
of the challenges with all the specific language we use is that most people don't use language so precisely. From Sarah, she agrees with Marky. That's a good point, and that covers them.
Okay, yeah, and it's hard to do that, right? It's really hard to do that.
And
And
Sterling
so-
loves your framing. Framing
awesome.
step to help people understand the point.
Thanks, Sterling. Yeah, that's why I said this is the most challenging piece of the whole of a presentation, is to make sure that the language that you're using presents type as type and not type as trait. I mean, we can get really lazy because we already know, right? So I can say, you know, I'm a big extrovert, and I think people understand what I'm saying, that the context behind it, but they don't. They then latch on to that as, oh, it's a trait instrument unconsciously. So language is so key and so important. Here's principle number 2, type is holistic, right? So I gave you a diagram of where type fits into the Jungian system. It's holistic. It's holistic from a Jungian typological standpoint, and it's also holistic from a type code standpoint. We put the type code together, and we know that there's more to the type code than what we see, right? So this is a quote I use to frame this principle. Your type is more than just the combination of your 4 letters. It is, in fact, a dynamic and complex interrelated system of personality. It's holistic. If we look at the Jungian model, you know, we come into the world into unconscious unity, and we move to conscious unity. It's about us. It's a system of growth and development, which is another principle, and it's all interrelated. And by the way, for those of you who have been practicing type for years and years, all you have to do is go into those texts, even the MBTI manual, and you'll find gem quotes like this all over the place that we don't tend to use. Here's my framing image. Your 4-letter type is just the tip of the iceberg. What I say a lot of times is, what do you see? You know, what do you see here? And I don't even use the label. And people say, oh, the tip of the iceberg. And I can just simply say then there's much more to type than meets the eye, right? It's holistic. And the objective always of the MBTI and any other type instrument is to find your whole type. Even if you're using the 8 Jungian functions, we need to move to whole type and our whole type code. And that's why I call it a type code. And I know a lot of us call it a type code, but we need to call that out. Why are we calling it a type code? Right? We say type code as if people understand that it's like a zip code. Sometimes I even use the picture of a post office. It's like a zip code, or it's like a license plate. It's a code. And then I say that so I use the Myers-Briggs mostly. So I'm starting with dichotomies, and I'm saying that we're piecing together your type pattern, right? We have to pull everything apart so that you can validate what your type pattern is, and the preferences that make up your whole type come together, right? So the objective is to get your whole type code. And I use the analogy of preferences being pieces of a puzzle.
Cindy, I have
Yes.
a thought from Meta. She said, I agree that type is a combination of letters and holistic, but it is very difficult to understand and work with when you're new to type. Type can seem too complex, and that's why the struggle starts all over again. Yes,
and that's why I'm giving you 4 clear principles that you can weave through your program, right? So you can put these in any place in your program where you think it's relevant. And if you just simply talk about them, it becomes illuminating for people. Yeah, and Meta, if you want to talk about how to do that more specifically, I can definitely talk to you about it. I am actually going to be here till 11, so we can discuss that. It's a great question. So here's an exercise I use to demonstrate that whole types are patterns. Linda, I'm sure Linda Behrens uses the analogy of patterns all the time. So maybe you'll like this one, Linda. I can't see you, so I don't know if you're waving or anything. But whole type patterns. So here's an exercise that originally came from the German certification program, right? So what I'd like you to do now, and this is what I say to my participants, find and consecutively count the numbers from 1 to 54 in order. And whoever does it first will get a prize. Of course, you will have no prize. Your prize will be your intellect, right? And I give people a couple minutes, and it's always a struggle. For instance, Dean, what number are you on now?
I hate this exercise, and it always triggers my incompetency until I get the answer.
Right. So most people, when I ask, oh, I'm on number 10, I'm on number 7. So I say, well, I'll save you from this, and I'll show you that there's a pattern, right? And it's kind of like when we look at behaviors, they're patterns that help us to understand the whole type, right? If you knew or understood this pattern, you would be able to count more easily from 1 to 54. Right? If I put the framework around the behaviors, and that's what the preferences in whole type, it's a framework. There are 16 different type patterns, whole type patterns, right? And then of course, I wouldn't be a good teacher, having come from the certification world, if I didn't say that every participant needs the 16 different personality type descriptions so that they can make sure that they validate what their type is, right? And these are just some of the resources that I use that I love. I love all of these resources. Third principle, really, really important. And that is psychological type is a system of energy. We move back and forth from all of these mental functions in and out. And I already talked about that. And I use the image of the energetic head, right? Of course, the mind isn't just the brain, and that's a whole nother topic, but it's a system of energy. It's how we get our energy. So here's my framing quote. And you can find this quote or a similar quote in any of the type books that you use. It's amazing. And we don't really call them out. The amount and direction of the flow of psychological energy lies at the heart of typological understanding of personality. That's from Naomi Quank in The Grip. Sometimes I think that we as practitioners, and a lot of us have preferences for extroverted or introverted intuition, and we love to go off and create this new stuff. And we fail to come back to the resources that we already have in hand. The amount and direction of flow of psychological energy lies at the heart of the typological understanding of personality. It's in all of these books. And I use this and I call it out. Catherine Myers, who was my mentor, taught me to really understand that type is personality in motion. Using what is needed and appropriate for the situation. Type is personality in motion. That is so much different than looking at a trait instrument or looking at type from a trait perspective. We can alter the trajectory of what our clients are thinking by using quotes like this and images. So we have a fundamental problem when we're giving type according to dichotomies, the preferences. We only look at E and I as we define E and I as our energy, right? Where we get and bring out our energy, where we get it, how it flows. But in fact, we know that when we move back and forth from our non-preferred functions, it's a drain of energy, right? So I always define E and I as the fundamental piece of the puzzle. It's our energy that carries, our energy preferences that carry the functions in and out. You heard this morning that that Richard was saying that nothing works alone. It's all interrelated. And our energy carries extroversion, through extroversion and introversion, the 4 functions. I talk about introversion and extroversion. I try to talk about it in the way Jung described it, like a heartbeat. It moves in, we move in and we move out. And I always get these medical terms mixed up. It's diastole and systole, moving in and moving out. We can't have one without the other. And sometimes I even do an exercise that, and I ask people to hold their breath. Okay, so everybody hold their breath. What do you have to do? You have to stop holding your breath, right? You have to breathe in and out. That's like extroversion and introversion. You can't have one without the other. Then I love this. It's from Roger Pierman's Facilitator's Guide on Leadership and Type. Show people right off the bat that type is relevant and that we focus inward to do really we focus inward and reflect. We engage introverting when we're analyzing, valuing, clarifying, and imagining, and you'll recognize the 8 functions in this particular diagram. And we're extroverting when we're organizing, validating others, sharing facts, and brainstorming. So type is a really practical framework. And this shows that we move back and forth between introverting, extroverting, the inner world, the outer world, and we combine it with the functions. We all do the handwriting exercise, right? And when we start to do it, and I say, write with your non-preferred hand, this is what happens on the left-hand side. It's hard, it's difficult, it's not natural, it looks childlike, it's sloppy. I can't read it. And then I make sure that I call this out, whether I'm in person on a flip chart or whether I use this particular image. When we write with our non-preferred hand, it takes more energy. That way, when I hear people saying things like you saw in the beginning of this presentation, I can't do X, I don't do Y because I'm an X. I say, you can engage that function. It just takes more energy. I actually keep this, if I'm in person, I keep this on the board and I keep referring to it over and over again. Remember, changing mindsets is a tall order. So I have a little pause here. I know the brain can only take in so much. What questions do you have? Thoughts, ideas? In your handout, I've given you a section for reflection. You know, what other exercises can you do? What else can you think of that helps to demonstrate these 4 principles?
Cindy, would you like people to chat in or unmute?
Oh, chat in.
Okay. Takes a while. Great exercise with breathing. Sorry, I'm not calling everyone's name out. I can't see.
Can you just go back, Cindy, can you go back to those 2 slide where you had the extroverted? Yeah, one more.
Sure. This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is from Roger Pierman. And it's in his leadership guide. Can you see the bottom source?
Yes.
Okay, good. He does it a little differently. I've just animated it, added people, changed some words.
And Angelina says she gets her participants to fold arms naturally and then the other way.
Cool.
That's a nice way to physically get it. Ian is saying, I asked whether students consider which hand they are going to use before using it.
And if we keep pointing out that it takes more energy to use the non-preferred hand, that's where we get the principle of system of energy. Type is a system of energy. Is that okay, Marky? You got that?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cindy, if
Yes.
I maybe add just a moment, I also like to connect the handedness back to the idea that small tweaks can make a big difference over a long time. So
Yeah.
I reference the use of using left-handed scissors versus right-handed scissors, or a left-handed mouse or right-handed mouse, and that it's worth it for most people to get the right scissors, even though that takes a little bit more adaptation, a little work for the workplace to accommodate them. It's worth it for the overall effectiveness over time.
Awesome. So it takes more energy, but it's worth the energy, Sterling, to put it into developing our type, which is the next principle, right? So that's awesome. Thanks. I'm going to use that. I really like it. It's such a great forum for sharing, right? Such a great forum. So psychological type is developmental, right? So how many of us, so again, when our participants come into our program, they think they're getting a diagnosis, or they're getting a label, or they're getting, this is who I am. And we need to help them understand that it's an exchange of energy, and it's evolving consciousness. And we move and we evolve our consciousness the more we look at what is non-preferred, right? So that's a good, I love that scissors. I use this quote a lot. If a plant is to unfold its specific nature to the full, it must first be able to grow in the soil which it is planted, right? And this is what we're doing today. We're trying to figure out where we're planted holistically. We're not trying to see if you're high or low on S or N or T or F. This is more of a holistic approach. And we need to tell them that understanding type is a journey, and that we are just engaging in the first step of a journey. And there's a lot more that we can do if you're willing to really go inside. What did Richard say this morning? He said something about the fact that behavior is outside of us, and to really understand type, we need to go in and reflect. And of course, we know that not everybody that we come across or that we give type to is really going to hold on to that concept. But at least we will be giving, if we follow these principles, those people that want to go deeper, an ability to do that. So we can show, and we probably do already, but we can call it out. The type has the potential for being a compass for our development. And we can point to the type descriptions that I mentioned before to show the potential areas for growth for each of the 16 patterns. There is a theoretical pattern for growth and development for each of the 16 types. And in a workshop, whenever we ask people to look at what mental functions could you have used that would have helped you to be more effective, two concrete steps to take to improve relationships with your teammates, whenever we're asking them to do any kind of reflection about their type, this is actually a developmental activity. And we can say that you're really able to develop in your type. It just takes more energy. And one chart that I really love to use is called the 4 C's. Characteristics, contributions, challenges, and changes. And I use that for the mental functions, Jung's 8 mental functions. I use that for the preferences. I use that for whole type. Because no matter what the lens, it's still a developmental process. So, as Catherine Myers so poignantly said, using psychological type as the basis for understanding development and consciously directing our growth, it bridges type theory with the Jungian psyche and the process of individuation. If we use these 4 principles and you employ some of the techniques and tips and hints that I gave you today, you will see a difference in how people understand type in your workshops. Are we going to totally erase that unconscious notion that type is trait? No. Are we going to like erase all of the stereotypes that have moved in from the popular press into our classes? Because it has. Not necessarily. Are we going to change the critics' views of type? No. But what we will do is start to alter how our participants think and behave with regard to type. They're going to see it as a bigger system of psychological energy that helps us to grow and develop. I've actually had people walk out of my workshop. This was the most interesting of the comments, and I got this years ago. Well, I've never heard type delivered that way before, and I can't decide whether you're right or whether the previous instructor is right. So it's interesting to hear what people say after a workshop that really incorporates Jung in a different way. So, as Susan David will tell you, over the course of a long journey, it may end up hundreds of miles from where it would have without that slight adjustment, steering the ship, if you forgot what the original quote was, right? Over the course of a long journey, it may end up hundreds of miles from where it would have been without that slight adjustment. So, what are your burning questions? And for this, you can just unmute. We actually have 5 minutes to spare. I'm shocked.
Linda says she thinks it needs to go up on YouTube. Catherine says she loved all the practical tips. Jane says those T's want to know your credentials, Cindy. Marcy says I use charting a flight to show that we all have to make course corrections.
Love it. Charting a flight. Maybe you can get off autopilot. Yeah, to build on that. Awesome.
Feel free to unmute. Everyone.
Yeah, feel free to unmute. I don't want to move the PowerPoint in case anybody wants to see anything again.
Cindy, this is Molly.
Hi, Molly.
Your images are phenomenal. This last one really is getting my attention.
What, the burning questions?
Yes, yes. But and in, you know, in regard to Jung's comment about how important images are, this is a really great takeaway.
Awesome. So I get my images, Molly, from Adobe stock photo. Be glad to give them out, but I can't because I'm, you know,
Sure.
Yeah.
Cindy, you also get your images from your introverted intuition because I don't get them actually. The way you get them.
Well, I actually do get a pop of what I want to look for, then I look for it and then I get it. But it's Adobe stock photo. Yeah.
I want to compliment you on the thinking you've done to select images, because that is not an easy task. I've tried to do that before, and you've got a couple of images that made me really think about how I might incorporate an image like that in some of the work I do. So I just want to compliment you on the wonderful image work you've done. Thanks,
Sterling. And it's one of them that it's the most fun I have is putting together a presentation with images. I just love doing it.
I think it's a wonderful demonstration of your introverted intuition in that you have that image, you know right away what you're looking for. And it's just a matter of putting in the keyword searches to find it.
It's so the way you operate the same way, Marky. So yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Cindy, I'm going to interrupt you. How about you take down the slides so we can see everybody's faces?
Is that okay with everyone?
And Catherine raised her hand.
Catherine Hirsch.
So You have told us about some of the negative comments, but tell us a little bit about the positive things people say when you share type in the manner you've been sharing with us today.
Oh, awesome. So yeah, so I do tend to focus on those negative comments because the struggle is real, right? So what I hear, so Catherine, I'm going to be really candid. In an introductory session, what I get is what I've said. Oh, wow, I've never heard type presented like this before. Oh, this is so interesting. Now I really get it. Like I in most of my programs, I do an inventory and I say, how many people have taken the MBTI before? And I know Jane and some other people, we do this too. And the whole class has done some form of the MBTI, right? And they've gone through feedback sessions over and over and over again, and they haven't heard Jung brought into the mix. And they say, this is really illuminating. Now I get what type is about. It's when I take this to the next level and bring it to teams where I talk about, by the way, I do talk about type dynamics in an introductory session using some products that I've developed that really hone in on the 8 functions very quickly without this whole mess of breaking the type code. So I do introduce the dominant function in those sessions. When I move to teamwork and people are really delving into the concepts that I presented along with Jung's 8 functions, people start to see type in a much different way. They say, wow, I'm engaging extroverted feeling too much. I need to switch and engage my introverted sensing function, even though it's really difficult. So those are the kinds of things I hear, and I get the best response when I have a second session with people. Does that help, Catherine? Am I being positive enough?
That's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What else? I can't believe I have a minute to spare. This is crazy.
I have a question.
Yes, Sterling, where are you? Oh, there you are.
Have you tried, or how much success have you had with it going directly to the 8 functions instead of starting with the traditional 4 preferences? How has that worked? Or not, as the case may be?
You know what? I have a huge, long history of doing type in so many different ways, which is why I came up with this as my my framework for now.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean I won't change again, right? So I started, Sterling, working with type. People would take the MBTI, but I would deliver right out of the box Jung's 8 functions. I found that to be a little confusing when they were taking the MBTI, because then they would have to roll it back up to a type code. And nobody really understood then how the parts were coming together. I've also done type where I've used my cards, my tools that I've developed. And if anybody wants to go look at my cards, I didn't want to make this a sales pitch, and I'm really not, but they're cards I've developed for practitioners that have the ability to take people to the 8 functions right away. When I do that, then people get it. It's kind of what Richard was saying this morning, that people can almost latch on to the 8 functions quicker than they can with the abstraction. He called it, I had never heard that before, that it's an abstraction going up instead of the opposite way. Now I see why people are having trouble latching on to that. But that works effectively. And again, when I'm using the cards and going directly to the 8 functions, I'm still infusing the presentation with these Jungian concepts. They're still relevant. Does that help, Sterling?
Yep. Yeah, I just was kind of interested in your experience with that, since I know you've had a lot of practice with that.
Yeah, I have a lot of practice.
Indeed, two things. One from Susan, that she will stop recording at 10:30.
Okay.
People can stay on, and I see that David has his hand up.
David, Poole? No, you don't.
Hi there, Cindy.
Hi, David.
Hi there. Thank you very much for your presentation. Very, very interesting.
Good.
I was just particularly interested in hearing you talk about the issues that you're tackling with your clients and customers, with the approach that you're taking. That would be really interesting.
With the adding in the principles. What are the?
No, I'm
not
thinking
clear.
about what drives people to seek your workshops. Is it leadership? Is it?
Oh, I see. Okay.
You know, what problem is or opportunity is it that they are looking to leverage?
Okay, so for the most part, people contact me. Well, no, not for the most part, but yeah, they're always looking for an MBTI session, right? So I have to dig a little further to ask them what their problems are, what their issues are, why they decided on the Myers-Briggs, what benefits, what their goals are. I have to dig for that because a lot of people have heard about the Myers-Briggs in a really positive way. Again, you know, I have focused on the negative to show you how you can infuse Jungian principles to broaden people's thinking. But a lot of people have heard good things about it, so they contact me for that. Other people have experienced team dysfunction, and they want their team to be more trusting and create psychological safety. So it's mostly one-off workshops with when I'm talking about Myers-Briggs and team development. And then I wrap in leadership development with type 2. And by the way,
Cindy.
I have to give a plug for Cash Cahey session because he wraps type into leadership development miraculously. Yeah.
Thank you, Cindy, for the